I am a huge fantasy fan. I love stories like Mushoku Tensei, Eminence in Shadow, or Danmachi, filled to the brim with magic, monsters, epic quests, and intense battles. However, by far my favorite fantasy light novel series has little focus on the action side of things. Rather, it's simply a story about a girl who really wants to read books. That might sound boring, but believe me, it's far from it. Let me explain why the adventures of the book Gremlin mine make for by far the best light novel series you'll read. First, for those of you unfamiliar with this series, here's the 30-second summary. Our protagonist, Mine, was a librarian who got isekai'd after a bookshelf fell on her. She's reborn as a sickly peasant girl in Ehrenfest, a duchy in a medieval fantasy kingdom. Since the peasants have no way of getting books, she sets out to make her own. And this is where the Ascendance part of the title comes in. She rises from being a peasant girl trying to make paper, to a merchant priest running a workshop, to a noble organizing a duchy's printing industry, and finally ascends to become a candidate as the next queen of the whole freaking kingdom. Through this, she has but two goals. 1, to protect her family, and 2, books. Okay, now that you have a general idea of what's going on, let's talk about why Ascendance of a Bookworm is great, and the most obvious place to start is the book Gremlin herself. Mine is an amazing protagonist. First and foremost, she brings an incredible energy to the story. While physically she's somewhat restrained by her frail body, mentally she's bouncing off all the walls, and her passion for what she's doing is shared with the readers very effectively. Her inner monologues are hilarious, making her instantly likable, and her dialogue with other characters is golden too. She is often unbothered by societal conventions and has no qualms about spitting pure fire at someone, be they merchant, bishop, or prince. This lack of decorum and common sense, by Ehrenfest standards, may give those around her a headache, but for the reader, it is a joy to watch the book Gremlin go on a rampage. Oh, and not just with what she says either. Mine gets things done. When it comes to her two goals of protecting her family and getting books, nothing will stand in her way. Whether it's raising her entire duchy's standing to get access to a library a bit sooner, or force choking a fool who threatened her parents, she is truly a force of nature. Now, from that last comment, you might think that Mine falls into the classic isekai protagonist trap of being an OP Mary Sue. But believe me, that is not the case. Rather, her strengths and weaknesses are very nicely balanced. Yes, Mine is incredibly intelligent, becoming quite adept as an inventor, merchant, administrator, and educator. But she consistently struggles to understand the common sense of the new world she finds herself in. As such, she also causes a considerable number of problems for those around her. So, while those who don't know her see her as the saint of Ehrenfest, those who know her personally think of her as that rampaging gremlin. Also, yes, Mane has one of the highest mana capacities among anyone in the kingdom, but this has also led to her having such a frail constitution that getting too excited can send her to bed with a fever for a week. This balance means that we can have the joys of watching Mine be a competent badass while not removing every challenge from her path and losing the story's excitement. So, we've established that Mine the Book Gremlin is a bundle of energy with a good balance of strengths and flaws and is generally a highly entertaining protagonist. Mine isn't just good for hype and laughter though, she also packs the feels. Back on Earth, and at the start of her reincarnated life, Mine's obsession for books trumps everything. But as she settles into her new life, another factor comes to trump even books: family. Watching Mine develop close bonds with her new family is heartwarming, and some of the most wholesome stuff I've read. From the boundless love and support of her commoner family, to the albeit gruffly given praise and hugs from her mentors, Benno and Ferdinand, to the more restrained but still caring support from her noble family, these bonds become Mine's most precious treasures. Then watching her fight to protect her family, and still getting torn away from them multiple times, is heartrending. Seriously. While the series can often be a relaxing, funny read, it's also had me bawling on more than a few occasions. So, I've touched on the laughter and tears Bookworm can bring. Next, let's go to the excitement. This series is a masterclass on how to build up tension. Bookworm foreshadows events many volumes before they happen. You'll have your comfy slice of life pacing for good chunks of the story, but lots of little niggling details in the background start popping up that result in just a bit of nervousness. All these little things will slowly build up, and then bam! You'll have a high-intensity moment of the story where things just all start happening at once. These moments don't happen often, but when they do, well, I'll drop everything to read the new chapter as soon as it's translated, and then be riveted to my seat, and oblivious to the rest of the world. These moments might not be as flashy as fight scenes from action shonen series like Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen, but to me, because of the build-up, they are way more hype. Also, while they're not the focus of the story, Mia Kazuki, Bookworm's author, can write really good action scenes. Particularly in the magical school arc, there are some fight scenes involving a magical sport called Ditter that are just amazing, with better depictions of strategy, tactics, and clashes of will than many stories that actually focus on this type of thing. I know it's extremely unlikely that Bookworm will ever get another season, but I would kill to see a good anime adaptation of any one of the Ditter matches in this story. The last thing I'd like to praise Bookworm for is its realism. This might seem a bit odd given that this is a fantasy story with no shortage of magic, so let me explain. If we take the framework that the author sets up at the beginning of the story with rules for the new world Mind finds herself in, from there, everything feels realistic. I think the best example of this is the development of technology. There's a few isekai where the protagonist reinvents a dazzling array of Earth tech in a new world. And to be frank, in almost every case, how this happens strains my credulity to the extreme. Somehow, the protagonist will remember everything they need to know, conveniently have easy access to all the materials they need for their inventions, have the tools to make them, and the skills to use those tools. Sure. Bookworm, on the other hand, focuses on a fairly limited scope of things for Mind to develop, and all of them take time, effort, resources, and a considerable amount of trial and error. If we take her main project of developing the printing industry as an example, we get to see her work all the way up, from making clay tablets, to her own plant-based paper by hand, striking deals with merchants to get funding, starting her own workshop, figuring out how to create ink, and eventually being able to hire blacksmiths to help her work on developing the printing press. Taking the time to walk through every step and think about all the challenges in a process like this allows me to buy in much more readily into Mind's reinvention process and makes her accomplishments feel much more meaningful. Then, there's the realism in relationships. Miyakazuki clearly does not believe that love conquers all. She sets up wonderful relationships between characters and subsequently torpedoes them. There's no convoluted misunderstandings or unlikely accidents that cause any given ship to sink though. Rather, they all fall apart for eminently practical reasons, such as she wants to move home to the country to start a family, but he needs to stay in the city to keep his job. That kind of thing. This, to me, feels infinitely more relatable than all the melodrama of your typical anime romance. Also, given the author's tendency to crush budding romances, when any of them do work out, it's way more exciting. The author adopts a similar approach to Mind's role as the hero in the story. While she has a tendency to want to save everybody, her early efforts for seemingly obviously correct acts like saving orphans from being sold into slavery causes quite a few problems. Mind quickly learns that her system of ethics and common sense, which she's taken from Japan, can't be applied to Ehrenfest and is forced to be more pragmatic. As such, while she doesn't stop trying to save people, she learns to triage who she's going to make the effort for and learns to take more roundabout methods that fit the society she's living in. It was highly amusing to watch Mind force choke her way through problems early in the story, but her scheming and negotiating within the constraints of noble society is even more entertaining. Now, at this point, I could easily continue praising Bookworm for another hour, going into its detailed world building, the well thought out magical system, its fascinating dive into gender roles, and many more topics. But I think I've already sufficiently made my point. Bookworm is by far the greatest light novel series of all time and deserves far more attention than it gets. If you aren't already reading this series, you should be. Thank you all for listening. Cheers!